First and foremost, thank you to Jamie Goldsmith for the very generous welcome to your country. And Jamie, having known him well, I am absolutely certain your dad would be very, very proud of you and the way that you continue a tradition that dates back thousands of generations of welcoming people to your traditional country here on the Kaurna Plains of what is now and has been known for about 45 minutes as Adelaide. The last time we gathered here at this always very special event, we were contemplating the impact of the referendum. But before I address that, I want to remind us all that both in good times and difficult times, South Australia has led the way for more than half a century in reforms that are aimed at improving Aboriginal lives. And this has long been a bipartisan endeavour. You look back to 1966 when the Aboriginal Affairs Minister and Attorney General at the time, Don Dunstan, introduced the first ever Land Rights Act with the Aboriginal Lands Trust in South Australia. And in 1981, the Liberal Premier David Tonkin introduced the Anangu Pitjantjatjara Yunkanjatjara Land Rights Act, followed by the Bannon Labor government in 1984 with the Maralinga Jarrah Act. And in May 1997, then Liberal Aboriginal Affairs Minister Dean Brown apologised to the Stolen Generations just 2 days after the Bringing Them Home report was handed down in federal parliament. And in more recent times, South Australia was the first mainland state to introduce a Stolen Generations reparation scheme and the first place anywhere in Australia to start treaty negotiations. And now, friends, we're the first place in this nation to have a legislated voice for First Nations people to our state parliament. On November 27 last year, we marked a historic moment. Aboriginal people packed out the Gallery of Parliament for an extraordinary joint sitting of both houses of our state parliament to hear South Australians' First Nations voice given at their first annual address, brilliantly delivered by Mr. Leroy Bilney. We've walked a long path. A great deal has been achieved by good people, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people across the political divide, and we need to feel pride in the progress that we've made so far. However, for myself, for many Aboriginal people and many non-Aboriginal people, the referendum was felt deeply. Not just because it failed, but because of how it failed. It was a moment that called for bipartisan leadership, a unity of purpose, and instead we saw some choose a path of division. We saw the very disadvantage that the Uluru Statement seeks to address weaponised against Aboriginal people. And I raise the referendum as the fallout from that period continues to reverberate for many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders today, and unfortunately has presented itself in recent times with a resurgence of re-agitating long-settled positions in this country. We have seen over the last couple of years calls from political leaders to reopen the Uluru to climbers against the wishes of Anangu, scrapping of acknowledgements of country by local councils, and attacks on the simple, very respectful gesture of a welcome to country ceremony, as we saw here this morning. We've seen the questioning of the importance of Aboriginal heritage, and we've seen attacks on the legitimacy of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags in the life of our nation. Let me be clear, many of these weren't raised as respectful policy debates. They were deliberate provocations that foster resentment and undermine reconciliation, a process that all of us here today are so committed to. And I really do think that we will look back on the period, the last couple of years, in Aboriginal affairs and reconciliation and shake our heads with some sort of a sense of bewilderment. But there is hope. And I hope you'll forgive me for getting slightly political. I am a politician after all. But on the evening of 3rd of May this year, it felt good to let out that big collective breath that many of us have been holding in. The federal election, I think, said something very positive about our collective nature. In the days that followed the federal election, only a couple of months ago, I'd been contacted by so many Aboriginal people and leaders who agreed that this moment has enabled us once again to feel hopeful and to feel confident in that hopefulness. The result lifted a weight from the shoulders of many in the community. However, I guess in the weeks, months and couple of years leading up to that federal election, some felt emboldened with a sense of false equivalence, believing that you could carry the same divisive rhetoric from a very specific constitutional question at a referendum into a broader campaign. And I, along with many other Aboriginal leaders, believe history won't be kind to Aboriginal leaders who played active roles in supporting and enabling the attempts to diminish Aboriginal people's values and culture. For example, suggesting it's not appropriate as a politician to stand in the front of the flag of your own people, or that there are no ongoing impacts from colonisation. Shame on those who thought that. But ultimately, as Australians, we didn't vote for that. The federal election, I think, was an inflection point about who we are and how we see ourselves. As a nation, we drew a line in the sand to not go further down this path. So, our collective task now is to continue on the path of building an inclusive Australian identity that is proud of who we already are and looks forward to the sort of people we can become together. The path ahead may seem harder to follow by the experiences of the last couple of years. We did take some significant steps backward, and there are people that are still hurting, but there is an answer. It is to take heart in the fact that Australians are given a renewed opportunity of working together. And, as I've said, South Australia is leading the way again with our voice. We have a state government that remains absolutely committed to all of the tenets of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. We're starting treaty discussions with our elected voice in terms of the next steps forward for treaty and truth-telling. We are resolutely committed to truth and treaty in South Australia. I am genuinely optimistic. I am genuinely optimistic about the course of reconciliation here in South Australia. I have to be, we all have to be. I've learnt from a couple of decades of experience in Aboriginal affairs that there's no such thing as a permanent setback for South Australian Aboriginal leaders. When one door closes, we open a window. We continue to stand on the broad shoulders of the reformers who've come before, and I continue to watch with deep admiration as the next generation of Aboriginal leaders gain strength and resolve to keep moving forward and progressing reconciliation in South Australia. There is great hope. Thank you.